Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Specifically, good morning to Elias. It's 7 a.m. in Washington. Thank you, Elias. So I have to say that I think I've got an exceptional talent, and that is to convince very important, very busy people to drop everything that they're doing at the last minute to speak to 200 plus people about their expertise and knowledge in aircraft recovery. So firstly, thank you so much, especially those of you who are joining at these strange hours. I really, really appreciate it. On this panel, we have got Elias Contanes. Elias is the Chief Transportation Disaster Assistance Division from the National Transportation Safety Board. We've got Harry Conover Griffiths. He's a Senior Manager Business Resilience for Virgin. We've got Andy Bowman, who's a Director Claims Management, Global Aviation and Space, and Paul Ryder, who's the Sales Director for AMS Aircraft Recovery. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. I really appreciate it. We wanted to have this webinar because, in all honesty, in the 20 years that I've done this work, I have really had a blind spot when it comes to aircraft recovery and have never really felt overly confident to talk about it or to know exactly what it entails because it's so technical. And then over the years, I've learned that I'm not the only one. There's so many emergency planning managers out there that are not, insurance airport, they're not entirely convinced that they know what it entails, who really will be part of it, what the planning department's responsibility is, what training should be happening, and what to expect on the day. So I really, really hope for everybody joining us today that we will answer some of those questions and at the very least spark some thought so that when people walk away here that they go and check their plans, they go and check their training, and they anticipate perhaps running an exercise to uncover some of the gaps for them. Anyway, let's see where this conversation takes us. We'll start with Paul. Paul's going to share his screen and he's going to set the scene for us and just do a quick presentation on aircraft recovery. Thanks, Paul. It's all yours.
Sorry, Anne-Marie, just to interrupt before we start. We are going to block all recordings, automated recordings and recordings of the session.
Okay, yes, please. If we usually our webinars are Chatham House rules, I know that it's very hard to say that in an open forum that is online. But please, if we can, not record this, not share this. We will assess after the discussion if we will be able to share this webinar. Generally, we don't have issues with that, but we just want to give the panelists the opportunity to agree after the webinar whether they are happy for us to share that or not. And sometimes it may include just getting permission from the respective organizations. So please respect the confidentiality of this conversation. Thank you. Thanks, Henny. Sorry, Paul.
No problem from my end. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
All good. Thank you so much, Marie, and to all of Go Crisis for this invitation. It's very much appreciated, and I hope we can add an insight into aircraft recovery and what our role is. And I'll just jump straight into some slides about who we are and where we come from. So AMS, established in 1988. The words AMS or the letters AMS come from the three founding partners, a family of the Knight family here in the UK. And we are the only provider, I think, that dedicate all our time into aircraft recovery, training and equipment provisions. We serve much of the militaries in the US especially, and we serve airports and airlines. Since 2020, we've been acquired by Age Logistics, who are based out of California. So we got a nice office to go to in California sometimes for our head office meetings and head office operations. So it's a nice place for us to go to from the UK. We've worked with Age Logistics since the early 1990s. They are the #1 supplier to the US Air Force for airbags. So we supply many of the stations in the US Air Force with airbags for aircraft recovery operations, support them on their training in different destinations across the States. And now we're all trading as one brand under AMS Aircraft Recovery. So our parent company has taken the AMS brand. And here are our locations. So we have a lot of our military production and head operations here in California, and in the UK we have our commercial operations and manufacturing. Much of our commercial work it gets manufactured here in the UK with our supply base here in the UK, and we serve our worldwide customers from here. The first thing I'd like to get into from our perspective is, what do we use to guide our equipment? What do we use to guide our training? What are our reference manuals, and what do we adhere to in order to make sure that we're doing the job correctly and in accordance with the right guidelines from the manufacturers and from ICAO? So the main parts here to talk about are the ICAO Airport Services Manual. Within the Airport Services Manual, there's a chapter on aircraft recovery, which we'll go into in a moment. And a lot of our equipment is all designed around what the manufacturers dictate in the aircraft recovery manuals. This is a critical document for us on how we lift, pull, and move any aircraft following an incident. Following that, of course, the operators have engineering and maintenance personnel with guidance plans and emergency plans and aircraft recovery plans. And the airports, of course, have their plans. What do they do and how can they help with any kind of assistance, and what is the emergency procedures? So going straight into the ICAO, this is our primary document that we would follow in terms of what is the provisions and how do we help our customer bases in the operators and the airports. How can they set themselves up to be capable for aircraft recovery? And this is a key document that we were helped with in the consultation stage back in the early 2000s of setting this up and setting out some guidelines. The key element is the aircraft should not be moved without approval from Accident Investigation Authority, and they may be involved throughout the whole movement process. The aircraft operator is responsible for the removal of the aircraft, and the airport must be able to assist throughout the whole process. The first port of call is the operator, of course, who are obliged to tell the Accident Investigation Authority or the Civil Aviation Authorities, but anybody can do that step in the process. So the general parts that we have within this ICAO manual is the aerodrome must draw up a comprehensive plan for the removal of disabled aircraft. And that comprehensive plan must include, can they get access to equipment and how can it be done, and who is going to take the responsibility of moving it. This becomes a bone of contention because some airlines have comprehensive plans and can deploy really quickly, and many operators may not have such a comprehensive plan on aircraft recovery. So the aerodrome must have a plan to be able to respond. The responsibilities are key, and we need to understand who the responsibilities reside with and who can first make the decision about what we need to do. But the responsibilities of the removal for disabled aircraft, it's not only with the aircraft operator, but also with the aerodrome operator. We are seeing in the marketplace mandates coming from governments worldwide telling airport operators that you must have some capability to move an aircraft, which is changing the goalposts a little bit from who is responsible. And the aerodrome operators are now starting to invest in equipment, and many already have, to make sure that they can move an aircraft should an incident occur, because this is a critical infrastructure and the aircraft is now blocking that infrastructure. So the responsibilities are key. From the aerodrome operators' point of view, they do require the aircraft operator to have a removal plan on file. And if the aircraft operator fails to take responsibility for the removal, the aerodrome must take over responsibility. Now, this is a key part that talks about, well, what can be done. And unfortunately, there's quite a lot of force coming from the aerodromes to tell the airline, this is your timeline. And some of these kind of requirements of responsibility kind of break down the cooperative nature. So we're hoping today to talk about how do we become more cooperative in the operation rather than dictating who is responsible and who is not responsible and whose job is it. The aircraft operator must notify the relevant investigation authority for any incident that should occur, but that doesn't stop any other party from doing so. The registered owner of the aircraft or the operator retains complete responsibility for the removal. And that's very important from a airworthiness perspective, should the aircraft be airworthy following an incident. And we'll go to the types of incidents in shortly. The types of manuals that we would go through, the aircraft recovery manuals. So each aircraft type has some unique features about how you lift, move, and transport such an aircraft. And we design our equipment in accordance with the ARMs. Unfortunately, not every aircraft type in the world has got a dedicated aircraft recovery manual. So there are times when best practices must be used using known information from similar aircraft types. The types of detail that's covered in an aircraft recovery manual include the survey, weight and balance, preparation. So if this aircraft is not in a stable condition, how do we make it stable before we do any kind of further work to the aircraft, like weight reduction and even lifting and leveling? And how we get this aircraft up, we use sometimes quite a lot of airbags to lift such an aircraft if there's a landing gear failure. And we are detailed in some aircraft recovery manuals, the equipment that we provide. Further detail that's included within the aircraft recovery manuals include airbag skin pressures, how much pressure can we apply to an aircraft as we go through the lifting process, and in what locations. There are some fairings in the body of an aircraft, for example, that we cannot place airbags onto because the fairings are not strong enough to hold the weight of an aircraft or that lifting location. Similarly, in Embraer, and as an example, they dictate that you should use slings from the forward and aft bulkheads. So this kind of detail varies from airframe to airframe. And the equipment that you use needs to be very, very flexible so that you can use a set of equipment for multiple aircraft types. They all have a very different way for doing things sometimes, and each one needs to be considered. So when it comes to following how to lift an aircraft or move an aircraft in accordance with the aircraft recovery manuals, it is the operator that will have this information from the manufacturer. And quite often in an airline perspective, it is the engineering team that will understand and be able to deliver such information correctly for the incident and how to go about dealing with the incident. And this is a very important step because it's the operator that will be putting this aircraft back into service, and they need to be able to record every piece of detail of how the aircraft was moved and can that aircraft be put back into service following simple checks or maintenance checks to make sure that the equipment is good.
Paul, I just want to quickly interrupt you because we spoke
Please.
about this yesterday. Just very briefly, the difference. Oh, never mind, you've got a slide on it. I want to say the difference between recovery and salvage, and we're talking about recovery. Sorry, go ahead.
Love the question. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm a step ahead.
And this is where we get into, so what are the remits? How do we manage? What is the difference between aircraft recovery and aircraft salvage? If there's no one particular term that satisfies that difference. In our world, aircraft recovery is a predictable incident. So an incident that, the aircraft is not completely damaged. We have a structure that has integrity. So yet we can start to think about how we can plan or pre-plan some equipment to deal with these incidents. An aircraft recovery is about the removal of a disabled aircraft without causing secondary damage. So it must be lifted in accordance with the aircraft recovery manuals, and we need to lift it so that it can be put back into service. Key thing is the aircraft is economical to repair, so it will be an aircraft that you'll consider as going back into service. The removal using specialized equipment is key, and recording every piece of data of how that aircraft was recovered. The example here is a nose gear failure in Belfast, and this was a simple lift the nose of the aircraft, extend the nose gear that failed, pin it, and then start to consider drawing that aircraft away from the runway and into a safe location for its checks. A salvage operation, unfortunately, this is a scenario that is more unpredictable. We're missing an engine, possibly missing landing gear. We have a structural integrity issue on the fuselage. So how we can lift this aircraft now becomes a very different operation. This may have to be cut and may have to be lifted using slings. The key part here is minimizing secondary damage as much as possible so that the investigation can continue. When you're lifting this aircraft following a hull loss or a major salvage operation, this is key to lift it and move it as safely as possible and maintaining the integrity of the aircraft as much as possible. And we'll go into the different aircraft or incident types next. There are a various range of incidents, and we make an attempt here to try and break it down. Unfortunately, there's always a mix. So as we go through a type of incident in a moment, you'll see that every incident even can have a mix of one or two things. It might be a runway excursion with a nose gear failure, but we'll go into that shortly. But the incident types and who is what is an incident type and how can they consider it an incident type? In aircraft recovery world, in our world, there are many incidents that can cause an aircraft to be disabled. For example, engine fire, fire on board, or even a full accident, or even ground incidents involving a collision. We focus on aerodrome operations that are affecting the runway. So when the aircraft is now blocking the runway or a taxiway and that must be moved, this is where we come into play as our core remit. There are many other incidents that don't require, let's say, specialist equipment or aircraft recovery training in the lifting and the moving of such an aircraft. For an example, an engine fire, that is a different type of disabled aircraft scenario. You can tow the aircraft to a safe location, but yet the aircraft is disabled. That's more of an engineering type of dealing with the recovery, very reactive on how you can deal with that particular type of incident. But in our world, we look at where the aircraft is intact and where the aircraft recovery manuals and aircraft recovery documents are relevant. So, as an example, burst tire scenarios, we would consider this the most common type of incident that will disable an aircraft on a runway or on a taxiway. And this can occur from heated brakes, hydraulic failures following, and heated brakes or burst tires following a rejected takeoff. We had one only, I think a 747 occurred only last week as well, or within the last few days. Emergency braking operation, all 16 wheels deflated on the runway because the fuse of the tires melted, as it should do, to stop the tires from exploding and bursting. But at the same time, that is now a disabled aircraft on a runway because of a rejected takeoff. It doesn't happen very often in terms of a 747 and all 16 wheels, but it can happen with narrow body. Against the rate of takeoff and landings and narrow body is more common. The types of incidents that we see are seized wheels, and they get literally ground down on the runway as the aircraft is attempting to come to a stop, or wheel missing. That can happen as well, where now we're down to the stub of the aircraft. So how do we deal with it? We can lift the aircraft and we can place a dolly underneath it to move it. These types of incidents are common. The types of times that would need to be dealt with are much shorter than an airline can get to site quite often, especially if they're a foreign destination. The next type of common incident that we see is runway excursions, where the aircraft has gone off the hard standing and into soft ground. Now we need to think about how do we clear the area around the wheels and how do we tow this aircraft back onto hard standing. Following that, the next most common incident is a nose gear failure. And particularly this can happen when a runway excursion occurs. So if an aircraft goes off into soft ground, it can lose its nose gear first. It's the most common scenario that we could get coupled with a runway excursion, because the nose gear is the lightest gear on the aircraft. Following that, we see main gear failures, an example here on a runway. But again, this is another type of scenario that can occur with a runway excursion following a soft ground causing extreme forces on the landing gear. And how do we deal with this? Well, we need to be able to try and lift it. And the first thing we always need to try and do is lift the aircraft and try and pin and re-engage the landing gear. If at all possible, try and move the aircraft on its own landing gear. Following that, if that can't happen, we need to consider specialized transport and angle support platforms and hardware to move the aircraft should the landing gear cannot be redeployed. Then we got a full main gear situation where all landing gear has collapsed or has not been able to extend prior to landing, and we need to have a significant airbag system or significant lifting system to get that aircraft up. And again, ideally, you want to try and engage the landing gear, re-extend it, but you may have to use specialized transport for that operation. This is the most major type of situation where the aircraft is intact and the aircraft could potentially still go back into service following a significant maintenance cycle. Following that is the hull loss scenarios where we do not have structural integrity to lift from. In this scenario, we have a tail that's no longer has the structural integrity. So when we start to lift this aircraft, it is now a very different operation. The aircraft recovery manuals in this scenario have limited application because we now need to consider that this tail will not raise up when we start lifting the aircraft. The wing is no longer attached correctly to the fuselage, so we need to consider more of a salvage operation. This is now becoming more of a general lifting and moving operation rather than an ARM and ARD operation. That's the aircraft recovery manuals and documents. At the same time, the equipment and the training can be applicable. Still need to consider what your skin pressures are, because they can see, I can lift this and maintain as much of the aircraft integrity as possible so that the investigation can continue once the aircraft is taken away from the incident site and brought to a maintenance site. We talk about reasonable timeframes. So when we're preparing for aircraft recovery operations, an airline will find it quite challenging to get to an airport to deal with a burst tire scenario or some even runway excursion scenarios, because the expectations are different and the different stakeholders will have different expectations about how long it should take for an aircraft to be recovered from its incident. There is some reasonable feelings about what this should be, and on this slide I've put in certain minutes and hours from an airport's perspective, and quite often from an airline's perspective, and the guys that have done recoveries in the past, they would look at some of these timelines and go, it's much longer, because the investigation can take longer, the deployment of equipment can take longer, finding the personnel can take longer. So the airport's perspective is, I need my infrastructure open as soon as possible. So the expectations here could be reasonable from an airport's perspective, but from an airline's perspective, this is practically impossible from a deploying the equipment and the personnel from base to the foreign destination to start moving this aircraft. It can take much, much longer. But at the same time, we need to figure out a way to start setting a plan so that expectations can be set. What is needed? And an airline can approach a airport and suggest, it'd be really helpful if this facility and this capability was available at the airport. And the airport can suggest to the airline, when it comes to a more major incident, what is your capability? So this can set out what the expectations are from stakeholders as part of getting this aircraft up and recovered and moving within a reasonable time frame to meet expectations. We talk about next is the aircraft recovery processes. Where does we fit in? Where do other parties fit in, and who are the stakeholders? The first key aspect after the aircraft is made safe, even the airport fire service have got a, well, when do we start and when do we stop our role? And I believe that part of the aircraft recovery planning and processes from an ERP perspective is, what do we set out and how do we set out some level of structure regarding what is the first port of call, and the reporting to the authorities is the first port of call following an incident. So they can decide if they have to send out a representative to do an on-site investigation, or if they can do it via photographs and remote communication. Some of the minor incidents can be reported, and authorities can release the aircraft for aircraft recovery following photographs and some level of incidents, because some incidents are not at an incident level where there was loss of life or there was a serious scenario that they need to come out and investigate. But at the same time, the processes need to follow the same structure. Setting up an exclusion zone is really important so that you get a safe working site. This is now an engineering lift outside. It's not in a hangar environment. You now have unsafe scenarios. You may have leaking fuel. You may have sharp edges on certain surfaces. You may have components of the aircraft not made safe at this stage, and setting up the exclusion zone is key. In the coordination with the aircraft operator, the lessor and the insurer, start getting those guys involved ASAP, because they can help with all the decision making about how the aircraft should be recovered, what resources are available, what personnel are available, and what equipment are available. Following those building of the team, you got the aircraft recovery planning, and this is the survey stage. How can we do this job and how can we recover it? And the survey can be done quite quickly if it's a light scenario like a burst tire or a nose gear failure, or even a runway excursion. But when it comes to a main landing gear failure and a significant lifting operation, it can take some more time to complete that recovery planning, as you do fine detail cargo removal, making the aircraft as light as possible, and you need to be able to consider what equipment is available for completing the lift, center of gravity calculations, etc. If that can happen, that can all happen before you touch the aircraft within reason. And then there is the release by the investigators. This key step is they are releasing the aircraft for the recovery operation. They're not necessarily releasing the aircraft completely. They may stay with the aircraft throughout the whole process to ensure that the integrity of the investigation can continue. Securing the site and the aircraft involves making sure that the aircraft is safe to work on and to work underneath, defueling the aircraft, weight and balance. Then you're talking about installing the equipment, lifting and leveling, securing the aircraft on tripod jacks prior to any remedial work is really important, making it a secure lift. And then we talk about the aircraft movement, which could be a variety of moving it on its own gear or with specialized transport. So how can we help? What can we do together to make this all happen? I have a proverb in the middle of all this. In our experience, there is a whose job is it feeling towards aircraft recovery. It is a multi-agency operation. The airport can provide a lot of value. The airline can provide, of course, the equipment and the personnel that have the experience of dealing with the structure. But overall, it is landing in that kind of area of everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. And it can end up that everybody thought somebody would do it. But I do ask the question after this proverb, do we think the job was actually done if nobody was a person? So I'm an optimist. I always believe that the job was done. Some guy named Nobody did it. So I'm happy with it. Aircraft recovery plan. So it's a coordinated effort, and I feel that it'd be really helpful for the operators and the airports to understand who is the point of contact when it comes to aircraft recovery. Who are the decision makers? The operators and the aircraft owners must take responsibility of the process. Reporting to the Aviation Authority is a key element that they need to make sure happens if it has not already happened by anybody who has reported it. They are the interface with the Investigation Authority. The airport must have their own recovery plans, and the airport must take responsibility if the operator is unable to take responsibility. And that may involve a third-party provider to come in with equipment and personnel to lift and move this aircraft if the operator has not got the capability. But that decision-making process needs to be coordinated. It's not okay for the airport to step in and take responsibility under the premise that it's not meeting their expectations. It must be dealt with in a different way. And I'm hoping the conversation today can build on what that decision-making process will look like. But the aircraft operator could do with a lot of help, especially if they are in a remote location. If they're not at base, they could really do with a lot of help from the airport to provide all sorts of equipment to help with the operation. What is the expectations from the airport? They can assist, but they must assist under the instruction of the aircraft operator, who maintains the decision-making process of how to lift and move the aircraft. This is after they have already made the aircraft scenes. The fire service need to look after the site and make sure that the site is clean, clear and safe. That is a first step that they must take. And then they assist in the provision of equipment and personnel. If they have equipment and personnel, they can assist and provide these services to expedite the recovery operation. There's all sorts of equipment that's needed, not just on the specialist lifting. There's the standard hydraulic power units, ground power units. But an operator that's based away from the airport, who are they going to get to provide a mobile crane with? The airport operator can have the emergency plans for providing these secondary and helpful providers in the local community to assist the aircraft operator who's making the decisions about how to lift. The airport can provide this in their aircraft recovery plan. From the airline's perspective, who could be the focal point on site? Could be the line station maintenance personnel, it could be engineer on board, the pilot, it could be a third-party line station provider. Their aircraft recovery plan, it could be a risk assessment approach. What do I need at all my different destinations? Can I set out some expectations of what I could need from an airport? Is there certain things that would meet the timelines? And if we go back up to a risk assessment approach, the timelines are different depending on the severity of the incident. Consider it like GSE. You need some provisions from the airport to help with you turning around your aircraft. And that is the kind of setting the scene of what would they need. And if we approach aircraft recovery equipment and training with the mentality of GSE, you can get an idea of, that would be the right level to match my quick turnarounds. But the airline is responsible for the full aircraft recovery report. What was done to the aircraft? How was it moved? And can they put that aircraft back into service following remedial maintenance checks? They need to consider airworthiness in all steps of the recovery process. So you need to have those aircraft engineers, and the Part 145 guys are always and most often best placed. They know the structure of the aircraft and to present the aircraft for maintenance. So in terms of equipment planning, clear understanding at the capability of the destination airport is in the interest of the airline. Is there already some capability? Do they have a fire service that have been trained in aircraft recovery? Do they have some equipment? And can they utilize that under the instruction of their on-site guy who will provide the input and the direction of, yes, this is how we can do it, with the reporting authorities in place and the reporting lines in place? Have they got the ability to position specialist equipment? Do they need to move equipment from one place to another? And I'd like to mention the IATP network. So a lot of the airlines will sign up to the IATP network, and there are aircraft recovery equipment bases. This is only the large kit. There's more small kits available as well, and this is an out-of-date picture, but it gives you an idea that there are aircraft recovery equipment bases around the world, and they will provide a level of protection and be able to dispatch equipment to various airports if they're signed up to this particular program. But not all airlines are signed up to this program, and there's many small operators who would find that not within their business model. Some quick case studies, just very quickly, of an incident that we got involved with last July. We're not a provider, but on this incident, myself and one of my colleagues in the training, we just decided, yes, we can actually help with this particular incident. We deployed our equipment, literally got in the cars, and we drove up to Luton Airport to assist in this recovery. Gulfstream led the operation. They led how to do it and what they need to do, and we provided our advice and consultation on site, along with some lifting equipment to get the job done. Very simple scenario where the aircraft was pushed back. It got caught in a very difficult place off hard standing, and it required lifting because this wing was getting very close to the ground. They were concerned that with more pulling and pushing of this aircraft, that the aircraft would touch the ground on the wingtip, causing high maintenance and more secondary damage. We lifted the aircraft using airbags. And of course, it always happens at a wet day, late at night. So the incident happened at about 8:30 in the morning. We didn't get the phone call until about 2:15 in the afternoon. And by the time we deployed and got our equipment, got to site, it was 10 p.m. before we were able to start the lifting process. By 1 a.m. we were moving. So we had the aircraft lifted and moving by 1 a.m. So a 3-hour operation started at 10 p.m. following an incident that occurred at 8:30. And if the airport or the operators had the equipment and the training on site, that operation could have been completed before noon. Luckily, in this incident, it wasn't disrupting airport operations. It was in a place where it wasn't disrupting the runway and they could progress with normal operations. If this was in a different scenario, it is likely this aircraft would have been moved in a different way because the cost of the airport would have been much, much higher than the secondary damage or the impact on the operator. Another case study from Toronto. I'm sure we're all aware of this one, where the aircraft did turn over. They deployed their team from Atlanta to get up to site, and luckily Air Canada had equipment in Toronto, so they were able to use site equipment for moving this aircraft under the instruction of the key team from Atlanta. They got down site, they performed a crane lift, and they moved this on a large 18-wheel self-propelled trailer. Again, an operation that required some significant planning, making the aircraft safe, making sure there's no pieces hanging off that would cause more damage to personnel particularly. But they hired in a self-propelled trailer to move this equipment because it was available in Toronto. Some sites and some airports won't have that capability, which is a bit more challenging. But in this incident, they could make this plan. It's a coordinated effort, of course, with the airport, with the Air Canada, and with the guys from Atlanta. And that's us. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Paul. Very interesting. Thanks for setting the scene. I just want to say to everybody that we will have a Q&A session after all the panelists have spoken, because there may be points that they raise which answers the questions anyway. But Paul, I wanted to say, you said everybody thought somebody would do it, somebody thought somebody else would do it, and then nobody did it. I know the name of that nobody. It's Harry Conomer Griffiths. So it's the ERP manager that's going to end up having to organize and find people to do it. There we go. There's your slide. I wasn't anybody. Everybody thought somebody, anybody, and then nobody did it. So Mr. Nobody, Harry, you are the business resilience or emergency planning manager of an airline, in this case, Virgin. Tell us, what is your concerns? What are your objectives? And what you'd like to see when it comes to aircraft recovery?
Yeah, so it's a really good point. So, and we've been thinking a lot about this recently. In my view, it's not just an engineering issue, right? The engineers are going to come in and they're going to be responsible for the technical aspects of lifting and moving that aircraft, but there's going to be a number of different stakeholders that need to be involved, and who's coordinating that. In my personal view, I don't see the engineering team having the capacity to pull all together the different stakeholders and coordinate that. And I think emergency response managers have the skill set to do that. And it's a phase of the emergency response, right? We're already involved, we're already coordinating other aspects of it, and I see it as just being a continuation of that. So yes, you do have the engineering teams involved, and they have aircraft recovery plans, and they're going to be dealing with the recovery itself. But who's pulling in the internal insurance teams that's liaising with the insurer, and the legal teams to ensure that we're compliant? Who's how are we making sure that they are carefully coordinating with the airports teams for support on the ground, and the impact that aircraft will have on the wider operation? Who's looking after their own health and safety? Have we pulled in our own internal health and safety team and thought about the conditions, the weather, what if they're doing this recovery in a remote location that is 5 hours from the nearest town or city? Are we setting up a mini base camp for them to do this recovery if it's going to take a few days to do? How are we doing that? Do we have to have some sort of liaison with local governments? What if it's the military that is looking after the site at that point? There's a government liaison role here. Security of that site. Yes, these recoveries typically will take place at an airport, but what if it's not on an airport? What if it's outside the aerodrome base? And how are we securing that site? How's our internal teams and our internal security teams liaising with local law enforcement? And then comms. I think that is a big red flag here for me. Is we're going to be deploying engineers to the ground, and the press are going to probably want to talk to them at some point, or may potentially want to talk to them, and it becomes a risk that they're thrown into a position where they're an unexpected spokesperson of the business. And so do we need to make sure that we've got some representatives there, or some lines for them to take to redirect those comms inquiries back to our team? So all of these, and these are just some of the moving parts, right? And these are just some considerations. But I think that we typically consider this to be just an engineering issue. And I think the ERP managers in different airlines can actually step in here and help take a lot of the burden away from the engineers to do all of these different communication and coordination tasks. We've got the skill set and the resources and the structures to do that. So why wouldn't we just step in and do it? I see it, as I said, I see it as a continuation. But I see this being as you said right at the beginning, I see this as a topic which isn't typically or traditionally discussed as part of the ERP role. And I think it's just as I said, it's the next phase along, and I think we need to be better coordinated in this space.
Thank you, Harry. And we discussed this before we started the webinar, is that we always thought it was an engineering issue. You're now saying, no, this is a business issue. This is a wider issue. People work in silos because there's so many stakeholders that are involved in this. And I think one of the biggest objectives for this webinar is the message of just break down the silos and start, like Paul said, coordinating. It's a coordinated effort, involving different parties. So big message is break down the silos and start working together and leverage the support that you get from your emergency planning managers, your business resilience managers. They hold a lot of the keys that will unlock potential solutions to challenges that the engineering guys will face. Harry, you mentioned bringing in the insurance, the brokers, and the legal teams. And with us is Andy. Andy's from Willis, and I mentioned you've got a fancy title, Director Claims Management, Global Aviation and Space. Andy, tell us from your perspective, what is going on in your office when you know that there is an aircraft to salvage or recover?
Yeah, the business title is just something on my card. So,
well, we are impressed.
Okay, well, basically, in a nutshell, I guess what I do is I work for an insurance brokers. My specialism is aviation claims, and I guess I'm sort of the glue. Myself and my colleagues are the glue between our clients that pay the premium to the insurers. We are the sort of the go-betweens in the event of an incident. Let's say this serious accident's occurred. as we've just seen on the slides, it can happen. Going back to what Paul was saying, somebody, anybody, nobody, somebody's got to pay for this, okay? So somebody has. So the good news is, if you are a prudent purchaser of insurance, this type of recovery should be recoverable as a cost under the policy, okay? So typically you have a supplementary payments clause, you have a big combined single limit for your policy, for your liability, but you've got to be a little bit careful. The message I would give is that there may be a sublimit in there as well. So there are costs involved in this exercise. They could be huge costs. The good news is the majority of them, I would say, would be recoverable from the insurance policy, and we as brokers would negotiate with your lead insurer or reinsurer on those costs. Keyword, as always, fair and reasonable. It's not a carte blanche to go out and do anything you like. Stakeholders, communication, massively important, okay? So we would like to engage with the airline, the airport, etc., particularly our policy holder, and just find out what the plan is. Insurers would instruct a loss adjuster, certain firms out there, as you know, your McLarens, your Sedgwicks, your Charles Taylors, etc. Get those guys involved as well, and that really would really help in the actual recovery process of the aircraft. And also, how much is it going to cost? Is it actually going to be worthwhile? If the aircraft is beyond economical repair, limited salvage value, then it may just be a bit more of a straightforward job to remove the wreckage and store it for inspection. But of course, if there's some tangible value left in that aircraft, it might not even belong to the airline. It may be the leasing company. Got to take great care doing this. And, you know, I heard someone say all about the governments and militaries, etc. Huge amount of spin-offs as well. So, yes, costs of this can be recoverable. Again, we've got to be a bit careful in this world of dealing with government officials and sanctions, etc. Who's actually going to be receiving the money? So, as I say, what I would, you know, the positive is, yes, this could be a very, very expensive exercise, but I would like to think the majority of it, when disclosed and discussed with insurers and reinsurers, could be recoverable for our policyholders.
Thank you, Andy. I just have a quick question. I've heard historically organizations say, well, it is the insurer's responsibility because the aircraft now belongs to them and they will arrange the aircraft recovery. Have you got a comment?
Bit of a misnomer, that one. Of course, if an aircraft is declared a total loss under the policy and the full degree value is paid out, then the form of release, the memorandum of settlement, etc., may reference that the title of that salvage will belong to insurers. But that's not a get-out clause for the owner, the operator of the aircraft, just to dump and run, you know? So again, there is something that needs to be discussed with that. The aircraft may be subject to investigation from the authorities, spoliation, you've got perhaps serious bodily injury that's occurred on board the aircraft as well. You've got third-party plaintiffs that want to look at the wreckage. So statute of limitations, it's not easy just to assume that it's not my problem, it's now onto the insurers. But, you know, the policy holder, the operator, owner, etc., has still got responsibilities post-event.
That leads us very nicely into our next speaker, Elias. So Elias, I mentioned, he's a chief at the Transportation Disaster Assistance Division for the NTSB. Now Andy mentioned the authorities may investigate. There may be all kinds of, the families may want to view the wreckage. Elias, tell us what happens from your perspective, please.
Thank you, Elmarie. First off, thank you for inviting the NTSB to participate. It's exceptionally difficult to be the last person to go, especially with a panel of such informed people. So I think I'm going to reiterate a lot of what has already been said. So I just want to start by saying you know, what you kind of said, Elmarie, which is that collaboration and communication is paramount. And it goes to something Harry said, which is this goes a lot broader than an engineering challenge that has to be solved. There are many different stakeholders. There are many different equities involved in the recovery of an aircraft, especially from, you know, my experience, which is really focused on catastrophic losses of aircraft. And I want to kind of I want to just share a caveat that I am not, in my position at the NTSB, directly responsible or involved in the engineering aspects of aircraft recovery or salvage operations. I'm here to maybe offer a broader perspective on that. So another point that Harry made that I want to kind of reiterate is that really we have to think about this in the broader context of the incident command. This is an aspect of the response, the emergency response, and oftentimes, this may vary by state or country, the broader command of that response is organized and led by government. And so whatever is going to happen, it's recommended that collaboration communication occur within that overarching incident command structure. Because there are various, as we said, various stakeholders and various concurrent operations that we need to consider, such as not only the aircraft accident investigation, but the medical legal authorities investigation, which is focused on the recovery and identification of those that are fatally injured, personal effects management, management of cargo, special considerations like hazardous materials or potentially sensitive cargo that may be on board the aircraft. That all has to be taken into consideration as part of that recovery plan, and balanced with the need to consider the continuity of operations of wherever that aircraft is. And that continuity of operations may be a real critical need, like if the accident or incident or event occurs at the intersection of two runways, effectively rendering the airfield closed. You really have a very sort of strong pressure to return that field to an operating status, versus just like a grass field somewhere that doesn't impose that same level of pressure. So all of those things need to be considered as part of the aircraft recovery plan. And one thing that was kind of stated that I think we really should pause and think about is the safety of all of those involved. And I'm not talking about just the physical safety of encountering hazardous materials or sharps or, but also their mental health and safety. And I think that's really important as well, because especially when we're talking about catastrophic losses, I would really urge those involved in this type of operation to consider how that will affect their teams and the people on their teams, and have a plan in place to really support them in the aftermath of what they've seen and done to recover an aircraft. So with that, I want to turn it back over to you, Elmarie. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Elias. I know that you are speaking from incredible experience on the scene, which is why the mental health thing is so important, because you know that these guys are technical, they are engineers, they are used to working, with the aircraft from a technical perspective, but there's a deep human trauma attached to potentially the technical work that you'll be doing and what you'll be seeing. So that's a very, very good point. I'm going to open the floor. There's already been a few questions coming in, but I also want to say the panelists, feel free to ask each other's questions as well, so I want this to be a real open discussion. If there's anything that you want to know more about what the other one's doing, please participate. But I will quickly jump on some of these few questions. Some of them just statements. I'm not going to read out the statements. I'm hoping we've discussed some of this. The coordinated approach is key, especially when bringing in equipment that can be costly. To avoid disputes at a later stage, how would you suggest decisions and agreements are reached and documented? I'm wondering, Harry, if this is one for you, perhaps.
Let me just look at that question again. The coordinated approach is key, especially when bringing in equipment that can be costly. To avoid disputes at a later stage, how would you suggest decisions and agreements are reached and documented? Well, I think taking a step back and first looking at this, right? So if you are part of IATP, which is the International Airlines Technical Pool, where lots of airlines get their recovery equipment from, is looking at where you're operating, where's the recovery that is required, what location, and how long is it going to take you to get that kit there. That kit also comes with the corresponding trained engineers that know how to operate that kit. And if it's at an airport and that airport is now closed, you may be having to fly in that kit to a different airport and then transport it via land, right? All of this goes into the expectation of how quickly can we recover that aircraft? Well, the reality is it may take several days, depending on the actual type of aircraft that you are recovering and what's needed. It may take even longer than that. I think the important thing here is to, as I said, that and Elias pointed on it, that coordination and communication piece is really important, and getting on a call with the authorities and understanding from the investigators when is it likely, or when do we think we're going to be able to get access to the incident site. When do you think you'll have been able to finish your investigation? That gives you a time frame then of when you think you'll be able to start. Having an idea from the insurers and getting them involved quickly so we're managing expectations there. All of this time is costing money at this point. And it's about having the right people, the right people in a group, coordinated, being aligned on the expectation and what's happening on the ground and what's likely to happen next and how long things are going to take, and having that core group engaged and being on the same page throughout it. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into answering this question, but I think that's probably the best I can come up with, I think.
And did you want to add to that, because it's talking about costs? So to avoid disputes at a later stage, what should they have in place? And I suppose you're the one navigating the purse. What could be done from a planning perspective to make sure that there's no confusion over who's going to pay for all of this?
Well, I think there's a huge element of trust in the airline, their insurer, brokers, specialist firms that are brought in to assist in this type of situation. I don't think there's ever going to be a case where everyone's looking at each other thinking, are you over-exaggerating what needs to be done here, etc. I don't really think that's the case at all. I've never seen that before. You've got to be, as I say, fair and reasonable. You've got to really, I guess, get everybody that knows what they're doing to price up what needs to be done. Now, what's important for us as an insurance broker would be to get everyone to talk. And when it comes to that dreaded word costs, part of our key role is to try and obtain funds from insurers quickly and held in an escrow account by a third-party organisation like a law firm, etc. So once these costs of actually recovering this aircraft and putting personnel up, etc., are known, then monies can flow to whoever needs to be reimbursed. So it's not a case of the policyholder running up a huge amount of money or having to, in times of crisis, find a way to pay people. If we all come together to start with and get some kind of indication of how much this potentially could cost, and like I say, the professional people will be able to suggest how many staff, travel, type of equipment, come up with a figure. We would collect that from insurers, hold that, and then payment can be made, which I guess makes carrying on running your business as an airline a lot easier, because we want to take this burden away. Everyone, in the insurance side of things, just wants to make sure that we're doing what we can so you can get on and look after your business. That's
Thanks,
massive.
Andy. Paul, I've got a good question for you. How can airlines best practice or exercise the recovery phase of the aircraft?
The recovery phase. So the best practice in terms of a technical perspective or a
How
process
can
perspective?
we practice or exercise? So train.
Oh,
How can we
my
train for
apologies.
this?
My apologies. Yes, it's really interesting. And the first port to call is, what is the current aircraft recovery plan, and has that been tested with some scenarios and some tabletop exercises? As an airline, it depends on the kind of personnel that you're talking to. From an ERP perspective, it's about setting up these tabletop exercises so that you can understand what the capability at the airport is, pick an airport, test the plan, and find out, do they have some capability on site? Who would be our coordinator on site? And set up a tabletop exercise. That would be the first point. If it's an engineering team looking to actually execute and do the recovery, there are practical training courses that we can offer to come to the UK. We'll do a training course on aircraft recovery equipment, understand the dynamics of what that could look like, understand how to do the be aware of the content within the aircraft recovery manuals, how to lift and tow that aircraft in accordance with the aircraft recovery manuals. So that would be there's multiple facets to that particular side of training. I think the planning is very important. How do we come up with a plan that can be robust and can be tested so that you have a roles and responsibilities set out of who's going to take what decision and how the decision will be made, who is going to be involved with the communications, both with the investigation authorities and the civil aviation authorities.
Thanks, Paul. Why you've got your mic open, really put you on the spot now. Scenarios shared are based on land. What about recovery if event occurs at sea, where the airport is located?
That is a very different type of recovery, a very unpredictable recovery. This is like the Washington incident only the start of this year. Planning for that is extremely difficult, and quite often you're going to be using military resources, infrastructure from a national source rather than just a private type of environment. Lifting that aircraft from the seabed, there are, let's say, the military resources that can assist who've done subsea salvage operations. It's a very different type of recovery, and every one of those incidents is going to be a plan on the day. I would consider that a salvage operation and a full accident operation, rather than our world of aircraft recovery within the aerodrome and within the aircraft recovery manual environment.
Thanks, Paul. One for you, Elias. What jurisdiction do the investigating bodies, such as the AIB, have in determining how quickly an aircraft can be moved following an incident?
Yeah, that's a great question. It requires careful consideration of not only the AIB's needs to document wreckage and perishable evidence, but also the medical legal authorities. And I think we have to be very cognizant of that sometimes that part of the operation can take longer than what an AIB needs to do. Just speaking, from my experience at the NTSB, we're very cognizant of the needs to recover aircraft quickly. Our folks are very good at knowing what is relevant and not relevant and what needs to be documented very carefully. versus wreckage that can be moved rather quickly. But that again has to be balanced with the victim recovery operation, and that can take quite a bit of time. So we should not forget that they also have a responsibility and authority that may slow things down a bit for important reasons.
Absolutely. Thanks, Elias. Sophie's asking, she's from Air Arabia. Hi, Sophie. I'm going to see her shortly. The ERP manager has the skill set to bring all parties together for the recovery. However, how do they know who needs to be involved? Where can we find a list of all the stakeholders who should be party to the recovery plan and who takes the lead in the operation? Harry, I think
That is
that's
a
you.
very good question. I don't think I have seen a list of all of the different stakeholders that can be involved. There is a core group, which you could probably think of from the top of your head: the insurer, the people who are providing the recovery kits, the investigators, government agencies, etc. I would probably first turn to the ICAO airport Airport Manual Part 5. That might have some description of which likely organizations would need to be involved, and I think you'd then need to localize that to the relevant countries that you operate in and see what other stakeholders might need to be involved in there. But from it internally, there's that broader group, and I think this goes to start the conversation in your own organization now, right? If your own team thinks that it's an engineering issue, go to your legal team and go to your insurance team, talk to your safety team, ask them, look at their emergency procedures, and do they have any section on it which covers aircraft recovery towards the end of it. I know from a Virgin Atlantic perspective, we have a separate playbook that we have created, which is an annex to our emergency procedures, and that playbook brings together all of the different stakeholders that are involved in the response, and they have specific checklists to do with aircraft recovery. And it goes back to Paul's point around training and exercising. I'd start that conversation now and have one of those. There are many organizations that haven't exercised this because they see, well, we need to have a big aircraft that we can pretend to lift. Well, start that conversation and have a tabletop exercise that just looks at the coordination piece, the considerations that we might have to think about. Choose a credible and realistic scenario for where your aircraft might end up and the state it may be in, and just talk through the response with a group of stakeholders internally. And I think you'll probably find that you'd need to continually do that, because many of them won't have already thought about this. But in terms of getting that core list together, I'd start with airport, the ICAO Part 5 for the aerodromes, disabled aircraft, and it's called ICAO Airport Services Manual Part 5, removal of disabled aircraft. It's document 9137. And that will give an initial list of organizations and authorities that may have to be involved in the recovery, and then start thinking internally about all the different teams that will have a touch point on this, and that will help to create some sort of basis for a playbook internally.
Thanks, Harry. I want to add to that also. I think we've got a variety of different operators here with us. Some have got, large flagship carriers, and some have got one aircraft operating for a royal family, for instance. And depending on your organization, the stakeholders within your organization will differ from company to company. So there's a few obvious ones that we can think about, of course. And Sophie will try and see if we can get some kind of a basic list. But I think it really, like Harry makes the point, is you've got to go and look at your own operation, your own company, and the roles of and responsibilities within your organization. Sometimes the engineer and the pilot, or the pilot is the engineer, or the pilot is also the emergency planner, you know, so it depends on your own operations. But we can try and work together. Maybe Paul, if you could help us with that, that'll be really good. We can share it around with everybody. There's also a question here, which I think is very specific to Paul and a single delegate on the panel. In the webinar, but it's really, how do we get hold of AMS in the middle of the night to help us recover our aircraft? And I think we might have to just correct that perception very quickly.
It is interesting. It does happen. And the reality is that we are an aircraft recovery equipment and training provider. It is vitally important that the airlines, the operators, and the airports have some level of capability to deal with the scenario, to deal with the issue. Deploying our team or our training team to deal with the scenario is not what we provide. We're not an aircraft recovery provider. We are an equipment and training provider for the operators and the airports to be self-sufficient and to deal with the incident, so we can provide the guidelines. It is fascinating. It's a question we get quite regularly. And there are, we'll say, scenarios where IATP can satisfy most of that requirement in terms of an airline if they sign up to IATP. That takes away that requirement. They have a solution and someone to call to deal with the scenario. From our perspective, we see that, yeah, it's not about one phone call to deal with the incident. This is a multi-agency operation. This is a planned operation. Further detail will be much more helpful on dealing with a variety of incidents. Simple incidents, how can we do it? Complex incidents, it is an ERP-led operation, and ensuring that all stakeholders are communicated with effectively. So it's interesting question. And again, I always find that aircraft recovery is considered one topic. I liken it to, can you maintain a business jet aircraft in a hangar environment? And can you do the same for a wide body full D check? So the level of equipment and the level of expertise on all sorts of different environments, but be it a turnaround line station check on an aircraft to turn it around at an airport, that's one level of equipment. To change the spar on a D check on a 777, that's a whole new set of equipment. And that's the kind of thing that we need to think about, is what is our achievements and what are we trying to achieve? Even if we did get the call and we're asked to go to South America by 4 p.m. tomorrow, it's an unachievable target, and we need to be able to consider, well, it's only a burst tire and you need to be able to change that in 2-3 hours, get it sorted, get it done. So even before we even have our time aligned, we can't achieve the expectations of what would be needed on site. So it's important for each airport and airline to consider the levels of equipment, the level of incidents that they can capably deal with within a reasonable time frame.
Yeah, and I think the key message here that I definitely want to convey, and I've heard a board member of the NTSB say this very, very recently, is don't meet me on the day that you need me. You know, the relationships, the coordination, the exercises, the conversations, the agreements, liabilities, insurances, they have to be in place before you need them. Someone else said, you know, fill your well before you're thirsty. And I think that is you don't want to be called when it's raining, because it usually is raining in the middle of the night. On Easter weekend, you don't want that. You really want to have those relationships beforehand, and that is vital. So we will share the information around, or the contact details that anybody would like. Just email Henny, which email shall we use for this? Can you put that in the chat to everybody? If they want to reach out for more information, we can connect them with anyone on the panel.
Information at GoCrust.
information. So can you post that on the chat? information@gocrisis.com. And we can do that. There's a lot of questions of whether we will share the webinar and the presentation. I will meet with the panel afterwards to see if there is consensus to doing that. So I won't say yes yet. We'll just get everyone's agreement. All right, so there's a question here from Mohammed saying, as Paul mentioned, many airlines have contracts with IATP, which provides a global coverage with various aircraft recovery equipment that can be deployed to an accident site along with qualified engineering team. So he has two questions, one for you, Elias. If an accident occurs, let's start with Paul. Do operators at that level also need to train their engineering team specifically on the use of the aircraft recovery equipment? So if you belong to that pool, do you still need your own training? And then to Elias, if an accident occurs outside the airport, from your perspective, what are the responsibilities regarding aircraft recovery? Would it be the responsibility of the country or shared with the operator? Paul, do you want to go first? Do we still
Thank
need
you.
training?
Well, it's like this, deploying the IATP model to a runway excursion or to a burst tire scenario is another process and a bit of a time lag to get that sorted. So this is where we come back to the conversation of, well, it depends on the level of incident. I would suggest that most airports, most airlines have a capability up to runway excursions. But when it comes to lifting the aircraft with airbags, like a nose gear failure or even a main gear failure, they can then use the IATP network for that level of incident. So I think the question is more, it depends on the type of incident that you're talking about. I would suggest that most airports and airlines can deal with the minor incidents within certain level and consider it more like a GSE provision, rather than being able to do a major recovery. They may not have the teams available, may not have the capability or the resources available. That's why they buy into the IATP network. But the IATP network can take time to deliver the significant amount of equipment and personnel to do the training. So in that instance, I would suggest yes, but to a certain level. You don't need to do aircraft recovery training on every type of scenario or every type of incident type that can occur, because that's why they buy into IATP, and that's why the engineering teams from the IATP network would deploy not just the equipment but the personnel to do the major lift.
Thank you, Paul. There's a few comments and questions. Still, let me have the advantage of the I think you've mentioned that now anyway. The question is, what are the advantage of the IATP member of being one? And I think you've just sort of answered that. There is an advantage, but it is not a whole solution to something that you may be able to do in-house. Where can people do practical training on wide-body aircraft?
We have access to wide-body aircraft at our training facilities. So we do it at a yard that has teardown and recycling of aircraft. So we tend to do our narrow-body training because it's much easier to do the work on, and it's more condensed and practical. The wide body, you can get some level of training on it, but again, it's an awful lot of equipment. It would require quite a large team to deploy a full aircraft lift on a wide body aircraft. We can do some level of incident training on wide body using a sling lift for the nose. We can look at different types of incidents in terms of debugging kits. It can be done. It would just require a little bit of coordination and time to put that together. It's not instantly accessible. It would require a bit of time to provide it, but it's a question that we've seen a few times, and I think that it can be a thing. But when you're able to lift an aircraft a narrow body, it is an expansion of the same techniques and the same structure for a wide body. So quite often, when you know how to do a narrow body lift, you've got a very clear understanding about how a wide body can be done in the same way.
Thanks, Paul. Christopher Johnson says, IATP kit has limitations, and you have no idea of the kit you get or the condition it is in when you get it. Having had to use it before, you need to be aware. So it sounds like Christopher's got, I wish I could open your mic, Christopher, because it's a webinar, we don't have the ability. But it'd be interesting to know what that experience is. But yeah, so he says that it's got limitations. Dr. Lucy Easthope, she's on our strategic board. She gives a lot of disaster management advice. She's one of the lead authorities here in the United Kingdom, and she always, one of her biggest tips in planning is plan as if you have to do it yourself. There's always backups and things like that, but if you plan, not necessarily with the aircraft recovery, but just as a principle, see if you can plan to rely on yourself for different things in emergency planning, because you may have to end up doing it yourself. So that would be your worst case scenario. But Paul, there's another question here from Christopher is, are there faster ways than low pressure bags? As you mentioned, long time frames, etc., and obviously time is money.
Again, yeah, it depends on the incident type. If we're looking to do a nose gear lift because of a nose gear failure, you can use a crane and a sling lift for that if a mobile crane is accessible to you. The terms of how quickly can you lift, and are there, say, quick jacking mechanisms? Speed, of course, is very important. We find that even just having the equipment and being capable with the equipment is as quick as any other lifting operation. Low pressure airbags, we have had conversations in the past where they're considered not as fast as other inflation and other jacking mechanisms. But in the process, if you're considering investigations, if you're considering deployment of equipment, having the personnel available, the lifting phase and that actual time of lift, you could be thinking, oh, you could probably save 10 minutes in terms of different types of equipment availability. And there's there are, we'll say, different types of lifting equipment out there. We just prioritize safety and aircraft recovery manual compliance and a stable lifting environment and safe lifting environment as our top priority. So the time between different types of jacking mechanisms or different types of lifting equipment mechanisms, I think that's down the pecking order of being time critical. Having equipment is the best solution. Having people that can operate the equipment is the best solution, is the quickest solution. And deploying that to site is it's about having those plans in place. That's where the most time is lost. So if we go back to Luton Airport as an example, it was from 8:30 a.m. until 10 p.m. before we could start doing the operation, and then we're done in 3 hours. So the actual lifting part and the lifting time to do the job is not it's not on the critical path of getting that job done in terms of the best place to save all your time.
Thank you, Paul. Is there anything any one of the panelists would like to add further before we close our session?
I would just say, Elmarie, one other thing for those on the webinar that are insurance managers, risk managers, or whatever, airlines or other organisations. You may have in your insurance policy something called a bursary, which is basically a vehicle for insurers to effectively reimburse you or fund you for projects that are focused on safety and resilience. So please check your insurance policy, have a word with your broker. You may have something in there called a bursary, which may actually fund some practical training with people like Paul or equivalent around the world. But yeah, just check, just ask your insurance broker. They can have a discussion with your lead insurer, reinsurer, and it might be something that can be paid for. Like we said, it's great to actually experience these things in practice beforehand as opposed to on the day.
Exactly. Thank you. For me, really, there's always the same underlying themes when we do these webinars or trainings or exercises. It really just boils down to have the relationships beforehand, coordinate, break down the silos, plan, exercise, train, isn't it? It's always that. And this is exactly the messages that I'm getting here again, is you've got to train, you've got to exercise, you've got to plan, and you've got to coordinate. And I think on the day, it puts you in the best position. And on the day, because it's going to be complex. It's going to be very difficult. There's a lot of stakeholders with competing objectives. And you as the operator find yourself smack bang in the middle of all of it. And not only not only dealing with the aircraft, you're dealing with the communications, you're dealing with the logistics, you're dealing with the families, you're dealing with personal effects, you're dealing with authorities and investigation. I mean, I can ramble it off. It is exceptionally complex. You're in it for the long run. But it is one of those things that if you're going to run a marathon, you don't just put your sneakers on and go, do you? You train, you exercise, you eat the right food, you rest, you do all the planning before you hit the track. And it's exactly the same. Why do we not put ourselves in the best position for this kind of incident? So massive underlining message is plan, train, coordinate, have relationships intact before you need them. And on that note, thank you.